let's get started. I want to introduce our three panelists. Thank you so much for being here. First off, we have Stephen Lee, who's a designer and educator. He has a background in branding, motion, interactive and experience design. He's an assistant professor in the graphic design program at Portland State. And I've actually collaborated with him on some Hubs projects in the past for SETI, a nonprofit here in Portland. So Stephen, thank you. We have Dylan Fox, part of the coordination and engagement team for XR Access, an organization dedicated to making virtual and augmented reality experiences accessible to people with disabilities. He also works as a researcher at the University of California, Berkeley, and he's studying how AR can help people with low vision navigate real-world obstacles, doing some really cool work. Dylan, thanks. And lastly, but definitely not least, Mara Gonzalez-Franco, principal researcher at Microsoft's Extended Perception, Interaction, and Cognition Lab, EPIC. And one last note is that, I'm using VR, but I think for the purposes of this panel, I will extend that to XR. So are you all ready? Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Mar, I first came across your work when I discovered the Locomotion Vault. And I'd love to have you share it actually, and maybe talk about it a little bit. For me, it was the perfect case study in the Hubs experience I was building around what's being explored in terms of different ways of getting around in VR. So will you share a little bit more about what led you to build this?
I mean, this is, many times we find a problem that is a problem for us, and it's probably a problem for many other people too. And that applies to accessibility in many cases, right? We find a problem in general public or in accessibility and transfers to the general public or from general public to the accessible community. And I think this sort of interaction is even much bigger in VR and AR, right? We're still learning from the technology. So I want to share a bit what this Locomotion Vault is first. So the Locomotion Vault is more of a dynamic visual exploration and database that is supposed to grow as the community grows also, because I think this is a very early times. So one of the things we did here, let me make this a bit bigger, is we started, and I've been working for a while in VR. I did some accessibility and locomotion tools myself before, like the ground level scaling in I'm a Giant, right, is work that we presented a couple of years back with multiple ways of moving across this very large space. And one of the things we found is that there are so many ways to move around. So I talked to Max Di Luca, one of my co-authors in this work. At the early days, we were like, hey, let's look at how many locomotion techniques are out there, right? Very much exploratory. And also we know that the research arena maybe has not moved as fast as, for example, some development. So we were like, it doesn't matter if it hasn't been published, right? Like if it's out there and people are using it, we're interested. And I think it was around when we got to 20 of them that we realized this was going to be on a different scale of numbers. And in fact, we have over 100 techniques in the database right now, and I'm sure we're missing some. When we enroll also Hasti, Sefi, into preparing this Locomotion Vault, she's an expert in visualizing databases this way also. So partially the idea here is that whatever you need, right? If you need some sort of controller technique, or, I want to use gaze only, you could search for it, right? Look, you want something that creates a lot of spatial awareness, requires very low energy, and you can multitask. And then you have reduced the number of possible things that you can use, right? And this is, for example, one possible technique. You have things like dash joisting. There are many options, right? And some are super crazy and hard to even understand just by description. So we introduce this idea that you can visualize it a little bit more, and then also YouTube videos, possible games that you can try to try what it feels like, right? For example, this is a technique that you're in third person, but you can also teleport and be in first person, right?
Right.
So it gives you this overview and also the detail of interacting in first person perspective. And this comes also a little bit from this idea that we published a couple of years back on, it's an opportunity for virtual reality that we think of accessible design from the start, right? There are very few technologies in which we have had this awareness of accessibility before we even started creating things. And I think VR is one of them. I welcome people to go through this. There are all sorts of things that only require hand movements, things that are based in controllers. And I want to go a little bit from all of the analysis we did after we introduced everything in the database. We look at what other people had done before, what type of categories they use, all these taxonomies, what they were finding, and then we kind of created this massive database out of all these exterior previous work. But we didn't want to propose a taxonomy because I feel like there are so many gaps yet that you should be able to describe the whole thing before you can. So we're more into this idea that, okay, we're gonna put sort of the same type of categories and attributes that were used before. And then we're gonna find similarities, right? Try to classify things. We also did a bit of an interesting demographic experiment on the locomotion techniques, how they've been exploding. There are many more appearing. Let me get a bit closer. So you can see these, right, in different categories. Movement seems to be one that grows very fast because of this embodied aspect of VR. But I feel like controller are a few of the things that can grow bigger for accessibility, rely more on controllers or maybe on gestures than complete movements, right? You require a full ability to be on the movement side. So it's kind of interesting, the whole analysis we do. We also go through a symbolic regression. But at the end of the day, we find these three main aspects that are key to access to locomotion. And one is how accessible the locomotion technique is, whether it creates nausea. So the less accessible, the closer to real life, right, in room scale. And that reduces nausea because you have a better one-to-one of your vestibular. You have more limitation of movements, right, because you're restricted to your basic movements. But the moment you move towards, things that are more abstract, like a controller, you can be much more accessible, but it does induce more nausea. And you can have many more types of movements, right? Like acceleration, 6D off, flying, things like that, that you will never do if you're on a one-to-one. So I think that kind of summarizes a little bit what the locomotion bolt is. And I'm happy to talk more about it, but I think we have a whole set of speakers here today.
Yeah, thank you for sharing it. And people can share their own locomotion methods if they're aware of others that are out there, right?
Yeah, you can share it there. We introduce it. Well, I mean, we look at it. Also the idea of this locomotion bolt is that as you're exploring things, you might find a gap, right? Like, and recently I was in the XR bootcamp, and there is a person there doing a lot of things with hands, right? Like now that hand trackings are out there, and he's sort of like getting all these locomotion techniques and how would it work if it was with hands? So it's very interesting because the same thing can happen with gaze, right? Like, how can I make this better if I have gaze control, right? And I feel like this will allow for many more techniques to come out. I hope we see this explosion exponentially. And the way I see this moving forward, I'm setting up as a sort of a challenge for university students with different professors. It will be announced soon, but we're gonna try to create a repo with all these techniques implemented. So you end up having sort of a passport. Like if you're building a game, you just use this repository, and then it's up to the user to select, oh, I wanna use these 3 different types of locomotion. And then it's a passport for you. You bring it to the different games, right? I do feel like there is not going to be a winner locomotion technique, even on games like Alex. Now we see a lot of, they even allow you to have 3 different techniques for locomotion while you are playing. So I feel like this multiversality of different locomotion techniques will be there.
Definitely the configurability to just let people choose what works best for them. Speaking of kind of some hand tracking and things, Dylan, I know you did a little presentation about sign language in VR and XR and some of the things that people are doing there. And you also helped to organize XR Access, a community that I found really helpful when I was starting to research this project. Will you say more about what else you see XR Access contributing to the field, or what you experienced with the hand tracking?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, Mike, thanks for having me here. It's really great to be able to come on and speak to you all about accessibility and whatnot. So XR Access, just to give a little introduction, is, yes, as mentioned, it's basically a community that's dedicated to ensuring that virtual and augmented reality are accessible to people with disabilities. And I think one of the things the big things that we're doing with XR Access is we have, of course, we kind of started out as this attempt to kind of coordinate and archive and make sure that we have an understanding of just what resources are out there. Mara, we've definitely got the locomotion vault in there now. I as soon as I saw it at the boot camp thing last week, I knew I had to get that in there. But something else that I think we're doing is that, I kind of realized early on when I was studying XR accessibility is that it's really cross-disciplinary, more than a lot of other kind of areas right now. To make XR accessibility happen, you need to have a lot of people with very different skill sets collaborating. You need to have accessibility experts. You need to have VR and AR designers and developers. You need to have researchers. You need to have professionals in kind of education and healthcare, and all the areas that we want to actually, put XR to good use in. And there's a lot of different people from a lot of very different types of organizations that really need to come together in order to have buy-in on this to make things accessible. So in addition to providing resources, a big part of what XR Access is trying to do moving forward is basically to serve as this kind of boundary organization, bringing together all of these different people and making sure that everyone is communicating in ways that other people can understand. We're trying to make sure all of these different stakeholders are both getting what they need from other people in a way that they can understand, and making sure that their expert knowledge is making it into the final result on a lot of these different apps and platforms and so on. So I think having events like this, and having Mozilla has been consistently a really active participant in these discussions, which is excellent. And so making sure that, for example, Mozilla has the input it needs from any of these other groups that are involved in this space is the type of thing that we really want to make sure happens.
Thank you. Yeah. And speaking of someone who has been through many different disciplines himself, Stephen, I know you have a background in interactive experience design. You've built installations for big public gatherings. You also teach students in a physical classroom and have been digging really into hubs quite a bit yourself. I imagine for you, the world has shifted quite a lot in the past few years. Can you talk about the experience of building an XR curriculum?
Yeah, I think to give it some context first is, I teach at Portland State University, which is a public university in Oregon, and the population that we serve is pretty diverse. We have people who are first generation college students. We have older students, veterans, and people with learning disabilities, other disabilities, and a really wide range of socioeconomic backgrounds, which I think all of those things kind of affect people's access to this new technology. And when COVID hit and we had to kind of scramble and change the way we were delivering this, it sort of exacerbated some of the sort of issues that we were already seeing in the classroom, like access to technology or just, the different backgrounds that we're trying to accommodate. So, right before this hit, we were like looking at VR headsets and trying to think about how to provide the technology in the classroom. And then once we went remote, it was like, we kind of have to work with what people have at their disposal. And so I think, Hubs was actually a really nice tool in that sense, because it was so accessible to students with like maybe lower technology resources. And also, there is that kind of accessibility component throughout built into it. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I want to, in the interest of time, kind of shift the conversation to prioritizing accessibility and providing that use case for folks to push this work forward in their own disciplines. I had a conversation recently with Asa Dotzler from the Firefox accessibility team, and he phrased things really interestingly for me. He said that when we build digital experiences, we are building the barriers. It's not that we build a thing and then we allow ways to get around them. We're actually imposing those restrictions as we build things. And so I'm curious for each of you, if you have any thoughts on this. Why should we be focusing on accessibility?
I'm happy to jump in here. For me, I came to accessibility first from UX design. Is kind of where I originally got my start. And one of the kind of constant mantras of UX design, like the first commandment in the UX design Bible, is know your users' needs and design for your users' needs. And when you think about the fact that literally 1 in 4 people in the United States has a disability, if you're going to design something that, up to a quarter of your users might not be able to use, that really kind of reflects poorly on you as a designer. I think something that we often forget is that people don't inherently have problems because of their disabilities. They have problems because we don't consider their disabilities in design, right? If you look at the deaf community, for example, a lot of people are proud to be deaf. They consider being deaf part of their culture. And a lot of the times in the past when people have offered, oh, hey, look, here's this cochlear implant that will cure your deafness. There's a lot of people that really don't like that. They say that you're trying to erase a part of who I am. And so for people in that position, having things like captions, having accessibility features that let them participate and let them use your applications, that is just good design. And the problem isn't that they're deaf. The problem is that you didn't consider their deafness in your design process.
I want to jump there. I think we're in front of one of the first times in which a newer technology is that is supposed to replace, right, the other technologies is less accessible than the existing one, right? Like from very simple things like how do you put it on, right? It's a wearable, and some people cannot really have that type of mobility to put on a whole headset. To things like Dylan was saying, readability, like with the current screens and optics that we have on consumer, like barely you can print text on the center, right? So it will occupy, like if you put it down there, probably you're not going to be able to read it, at least if you're using Fresnel. It's getting better, right? Like the resolution is going to get better, this optics will get better, but so far. And the last one is the embodied part of it, right? Like this idea that you substitute your body when you are in VR And well, if your body is not able, fully able of movement, that transfers. Okay, so I feel like these are a few challenges that transcend just the consumer. It applies also to an accessible work environment, to, you know, how our company is gonna put this as their main devices. You have to comply with even to the basic level of regulations, right? So I do feel like all of these challenges are they are important, right, for adoption even.
Yeah, I know even for me with certain VR experiences, I don't have a big room to be able to use VR. And I was playing some game and I kept smashing my fist on the furniture and walls around me. And so even, you know, if you think about accessibility as the access to technology and to space, Stephen, you probably, you know, have students coming from all these different backgrounds that you mentioned who have differing levels of access to technology. Did you encounter that, like with the Hubs experience that you built for your students gallery?
Yeah, I mean, I think with that experience and also just teaching online, I would realize some things that I took for granted, you know, a steady internet connection, or the ability to have multiple browser windows open and have things running smoothly. Those are things that I hadn't thought would be an issue. And trying to troubleshoot those things virtually is really, really difficult. And so that was a lot of what we were trying to play with, trying to optimize the experience so that it was accessible, right, on lower end devices, or on a phone, let's say, right. I was going to say, in terms of accessibility, I think you know, when we design things for people at the margins, we make a better product for everyone, and that's important. I also think there's this and there's accessibility, and there's also this idea of inclusion and bringing people from different backgrounds or other voices in. And I think especially in this environment, looking at you know, people from BIPOC communities, or you know, just other making sure that we're not just listening to one voice is really important in this as we develop this technology.
Yeah, that's actually a really great segue into a question I had for you, Mark. When I was researching this project, Microsoft kept coming up around accessibility research and innovation. And someone mentioned to me that Microsoft just actively weaves accessibility into the fabric of how things are built from the start, including recruiting folks with disabilities and a culture that sees focusing on accessibility as a route towards building those better projects and products. Can you talk a little bit about
I mean, I think we have a very good track on this. There is always more to be done, of course, but I want to put an example of another project I'm involved on the accessibility arena that also shows the potential of these technologies to impact the life of a person who has limitations is much higher even than what we think of the general public. And I think the project Soundscape, I don't know if you ever tried this Microsoft Soundscape app, which is meant to allow navigation in a much easier way for folks who are blind, or you know, with the vision limitations, quite large vision limitations. It's mostly based on audio beacons. So the idea here is, instead of using the regular GPS navigation of turn right, turn left, it's more of an auditory experience in which you have a sound coming from a particular destination that you select, right? And then that guides you there. Even from an anthropological perspective, it's much more natural for humans to go in that direction, right? Like when we were foraging in the forest, we would hear, you know, some sort of water source, you know, some waterfall, some river. We would walk towards there. We will create a mental map and be able to return. GPS navigation nowadays, how many times you get somewhere and you don't remember how you got there, right? With the turn right, turn left. So it's even, you know, undermining our own decision making and our own mental abilities in the general public. But for blind folks to discover things around them on their own this is just a mind-blowing thing, because they generally have been trained to learn a specific route with a trainer. And this tool allows them that once they are confident with the tool, actually the lead on this project, who is blind himself, often tells the story of, I got off the wrong stop in the bus and this thing saved it, right? Like I was able to just navigate to where I was supposed to go, despite missing my bus stop. And it encompasses a bunch of more things, like, it tells you as you're walking what is around you. So it means that you can use it even when you're on the car, or like it gives you much more mental awareness of things surrounding you. And this is a particular case of what Stephen was saying, right? Like we create this tool that is very much focused on this opportunity for supporting this very large number of people if you look globally. And in fact, we're in 6 countries already. We recently launched in Brazil. And, this is a research project. It's a product from Microsoft, but it comes from research. And what we're seeing is that this type of GPS navigation is better than turn by turn. And we're trying to push this type of navigation even for the general public, right? Like imagine if you could have this on Bing Maps or, I think that oftentimes we learn things here that can transfer to the other side. And the other reason why I like this project a lot is because it doesn't focus, it's an augmented reality experience, it's a virtual reality experience, spatial computing focus on blind users, which generally you're like, oh, VR doesn't work for blind people. And you're like, well, think of it as a spatial computing. Think of it as the content now is around us instead of inside a screen. And in fact, if you think it this way, it's probably more accessible to blind population than it was before, because before it was truly only on the screen, and now it's around you. So you can perceive it in many new ways. And I think the experience of Soundscape, you can try it, you can download it. It's very interesting in that sense. It opens new ideas of accessibility in XR. This is the tool, and this is how, I'll share it again with audio. I'll just go very quickly. I don't want to take a lot of time with this, but I think it's, one of these tools that gives a very different experience.
A busy city street. Maya with her guide dog.
Good boy, steady. Steady, good boy.
Erin Lauritsen.
So one of the interesting things is we're not trying to replace tools that blind folks are used to, right? Like you still use your cane or your dog for the immediate mobility. This is more about the spatial mapping of where are you in the world.
Because it's designed such that you can just put it in your pocket and go.
Maya using Soundscape, walking with Alex.
DSW Shoe Warehouse.
DSW Shoe Warehouse. Cool things happening around town here. When I'm with other people, I'm able to gather a lot of the same information my sighted friends or family are getting from the signage around me. And with that, I'm able to participate in, hey, look what's over there.
Desigual.
Oh, Desigual is showing up here as well, which is one of my favorite stores.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Those moments that don't usually happen for me in my life.
David, walking in the park.
Using the technology is relatively easy. You have to still concentrate on listening for obstacles, but you then get used to the chatter in the background and you can pick out suddenly something that's of interest to you.
Shona around town.
It was great telling me all the different shops as I passed, which is lovely. And the different street names as well. Quite often I don't know, which street's which.
Approaching intersection. Battery goes right.
Maya, touching phone screen.
We have a beacon set for Nike store, 248 yards. The beacon has been helpful in approaching different addresses and places in busier areas.
Arm extended, pointing with her phone.
I'm getting the bell right about here.
Great. So let's just head off that way.
Okay. Forward.
passing through an open market.
It's been a unique experience to work with the Soundscape team. They have been so transparent, forthcoming, open to feedback. It's been a really dynamic relationship. You have blind people on your team. You're working deeply with agencies like Lighthouse and reaching out and engaging with blind people in different places and from different backgrounds, and really making sure that what's being created is aligned with the needs of the community.
Fiddler forward.
So I'll leave it there, but you see it has different tools in it, like this, I want to go here to, I want to know what's around me, from things that are like what the stores are, and it's few of the things that we were very focused on the creation of this tool is, one, it works on phones, which is something people already have. You can, like, as headphones and other options of head tracking are coming available. We're incorporating them, like the Bose head sunglasses that have head tracking. But if you have your phone, you can use the phone to point, right? Like it has a way to navigate this way too. So it's, it's compatible with current technology. We try to make it forward compatible with future technology too. And I feel like the partnerships with current teams that are already helping people to navigate, right? Like to learn how to move. They give them the dog and the app. They teach them over a couple of few weeks, and then they go on their own. And I feel like that's the perfect partnership also, right? So I oftentimes, I worry in the accessibility community that you need to have the right partner, right? There is like a million types of gloves created for signaling, million types of, it's like maybe that's not what the community needs. So I feel like in order to really do that, having inside the company people like Amos Miller, for example, who is the lead on this, who is blind himself, right? It gives you a very different perspective. And you look at the app, and the app it's not super nice visually, but it doesn't matter because it reads super nice through the screen reader. It does the things that it needs to do for a blind population.
Yeah, speaking of that community angle, Dylan, I know you were the one that kind of introduced me to the phrase "nothing about us without us," or "nothing for us without us." And in your work with XR Access, I'm sure you must encounter that need to collaborate across disciplines and across organizations a lot.
Yeah.
Can you think of like a couple of like key or easy entry, low-hanging fruit accessibility ideas that you would recommend to folks to incorporate into how they design and build things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the single biggest thing you can do is, as Mara was saying, get people with disabilities on your team. Failing that, at least make sure that you're testing with them, because I'll give you some tips here, but I think that's absolutely the biggest one is getting people. As you said, nothing about us without us. I think a lot of that sometimes has changed to simply nothing without us, meaning make sure that you're designing things with hand in hand with the people that you're trying to help. That being said, I think two things that I think a lot of XR developers could really benefit from in terms of accessibility. One is make sure that your app can be used by someone seated with one hand or no hands, without having to kind of twist or lean over in your chair or stand up and walk around. Because doing that is not only going to make it accessible to a wide variety of people with mobility impairments, is also going to mean that somebody can use your app on an airplane or seated in a cubicle, right? And not have to even if you're able-bodied, apps that expect you to duck and dodge and dive and roll, or even just to like go up here and go down there and do a lot of physical movement. Those are going to be less accessible, and they're just going to be tiring, and they're going to be limiting to limiting your app to people with the space necessary for those kinds of movements. So that's one. And then two is just a big thing in VR as it is in 2D, include captions. You should be able to use your experience muted and not get stuck, right? That's just something that is almost everywhere now in 2D design, but in XR, we're kind of having to do it all over again. And it is tricky because captions in XR, you can't just put them at the bottom of the screen. Because, let's say I have somebody talking on my left and then an alarm starts blaring on my right. Ideally these captions should be placed in A, somewhere that's comfortable to read. B, it should tell me a little bit about maybe who's talking and what direction I need to look in order to see them. And these aren't trivial challenges, and hopefully soon we'll have APIs that you can just tap into, so you don't have to kind of do all this from scratch. But nonetheless, I think captions are just so helpful for so many people, hearing or not, that I have to put them as the other kind of shout out here of if you have to pick, one or two accessibility features, these are the ones to get. If you want to read a bunch more, just really low-hanging fruit, things that if you're just thinking about them during the design process, they're not hard to do. Go to xraccess.org/resources, and I'll put this in the chat here in a minute. And we've got a bunch of really excellent resources, including the XR Association. One of our partners just put out a 10-page or so guide to accessibility and inclusive design in immersive experiences. And it'll give you kind of a rundown of here's the kind of top features that benefits people with visual disabilities, the benefit people with hearing disabilities, and so on and so forth. So definitely check that out, and just try to always keep in mind, think about users that are different than you. Think about users that, think of your, I think somebody just put a great question in the chat about like children and elders, you being able to use XR. Think about those users. Think about the people that not only are permanently disabled, but that maybe have something else going on in the background. Think about people that are doing something else with one hand or multitasking. Your accessibility features will benefit them too. So take a look at those guides, spread them around, and it's going to make applications for everyone better, I think.
It will be exciting to see those advancements taking place. And I guess with that in mind, for any of you, are there particular things you see on the horizon that you're really excited about?
I'll just do a quick one. I'm really excited about OpenXR. I think having a lot of different groups, different platforms using this kind of common platform, that hopefully, soon we're one of our big goals for XR Access is to work with groups like OpenXR to make sure that if you want to include captions, let's make it easy for you. Let's not make you have to reinvent the wheel. So seeing things like that, and seeing things like the locomotion vault, where I'm not sure right now whether it includes like code snippets and whatnot, but I'd love to see a future where people can just kind of take these known accessible techniques and just kind of dip in, and adding it to your Unity project, your Unreal project, be as easy as downloading a plugin, or that type of thing. I think is really exciting. What hopefully we'll be seeing soon.
I want to add here, because I feel like in general, one of the areas that is a bit underserved for the VR AR community is creation tools, right? Authoring tools. And that gets even more exacerbated for everything that is, on the sides of what is mainstream. And I feel like at least I am trying to build a lot of open sourcing to work around this, right? Like I've been open sourcing avatars, open sourcing motion capture tools for avatars, and now the locomotion techniques that I'm gonna try to implement and open source also with a global force of people, because once you have this amount of techniques, it becomes kind of it's not a work of a one person at this point. So I'm also engaging a lot with external collaborators for this open sourcing work. And I think that's the only way we get to the plugin levels that Dylan is talking about. But I think authoring tools in general are still not for, where is the scratch of VR? Where is the, all these things? And then going back a bit to what Dylan was saying also on the captioning that needs to be attached to particular events also. And I feel in general, we need to put these new devices, and they will also change over time, into the public and see how they respond to it. And then what we will see is maybe a website doesn't look like a website at all once you're in VR, right? Or maybe, so I do think that one of the way to get to there is, if you look at the day, we have 24 hours. We can have 2 hours of maximum of entertainment, gaming or whatever. If you have kids, forget about that. So you have maximum your 8 hours of work. And I think that, and then you sleep and eat. So I think those 8 hours is when you can really introduce new technologies, is through the productivity area. And if you think of a portable device that, has a lot of real estate and, more than one screen, in theory, you can render all of that inside a VR headset. So that would be kind of the entry point, I think, that makes more sense for most of people. And once you're there, you're going to figure out, okay, well, now gaming doesn't look like traditional gaming. Now, I sort of feel like we have started by trying to put these devices very much on areas that are hard to enter. But we will learn a lot when we put them as a replacement of the laptop, as a replacement of, right? And then we will figure out many new things. And it is an opportunity, right? As we're saying, for accessibility, that we can design from the scratch being accessible. It's not happening yet on the large scale. I would say that it's again going just for the general public. Even VR headsets are not ready for kids, right? Like, it's a super large population. I'm not even talking about disabilities there, who cannot even wear a headset because it's not meant for their IPD, right? So I do feel like there is a lot of work there too. So it is on authoring tools and on this whole idea that there is no diversity in how things are built, and we don't know how things will actually look like.
Yeah, I was surprised. It kind of what got me down this path in the first place to learn more about VR accessibility was just the fact that I came across, I think it was in November or December, Oculus posted their first VR accessibility like design guidelines, and they've been around for 8 years and are just now getting around to that aspect of it. So clearly, yeah, has a long way to go. Stephen, I'm curious, from your perspective in virtual education, you must have students really, wishing or asking for, different features than what they're being given in the sort of like Zoom classroom environment. I know Zoom fatigue is a thing we hear a lot about. Are there things you kind of see on the horizon or have on your wish list?
There's some things that Zoom does well, and like being able to have this like synchronous conversation, being able to like monitor everyone, like if everyone turns their cameras on and you're able to see faces, I feel like you get a little bit more feedback than in one of my classes we were building hubs, and we were in there and it was we're all avatars, and it's like sometimes kind of hard to know like, oh, is this person understanding what I'm saying, or how is this person responding. But I think what worked really well is like, we were building out a space and we were building an exhibition. And so to be able to prototype something that, and at scale and to experience it, these are things that are kind of hard to do in the real world at scale. Like, if we wanted to build an exhibition and walk around in it, it would be really hard. Or if like, I've done projection mapping with classes, but that requires certain technology and like light conditions and things like that. And now we could just throw up a video in a virtual space and kind of test that out and experience that. So that was, I think that was helpful. And I also think people will just, with this new technology, they'll kind of figure things out. I think people are figuring out how to use Zoom effectively, and people are figuring out how to use hubs or other XR technology. I think, we had like a gallery opening, I guess, and just it was interesting to see the way people like started figuring out how to use the tools, or like one person was like dancing by like moving their mouse really quickly, like, and just seeing that was kind of interesting. So
yeah, the improvisation and the techniques that people find to make things their own and feel right for them is really fascinating. Actually, that brings up Dylan. An example I saw in one of your videos where somebody was using, I think it was VR chat and the hand tracking there to come up with like essentially like a new form of sign language that got around the issue that you can't use all of your 5 fingers on both hands to sign in VR. Are there good examples you've seen of that where people are kind of coming up with their own solutions?
People, period, when they have goals, when they put their minds to things, they will try to come up with workarounds to make it work, right? You just look at Minecraft and the shenanigans people got up to making custom computers and not using minecarts. You can see an example of that. I think when it comes to things like sign language, it's an interesting example because, there's definitely the group of people. There's going to be some deaf folks that really absolutely have seen this thing they want to participate in, and they will, come up with, for example, the case in point here is basically a kind of suite of signs that take advantage of the fact that some of the early VR controllers give you basically big mittens. You can't control each finger independently. And so these, folks would come up with kind of an alternate dialect almost that makes that feasible. Now, of course, I've talked to some deaf folks about this since then, and some of them say, well, that's great that people are doing it. Others say, well, you might as well ask people to join voice chat, but they have to have this thing stuck in their mouth the whole time, and they'll come up with an alternate dialect that lets them talk around it. I think it's fantastic to see examples of this, like where the community is forging their own way, and it's great to learn from that, and to try to use those statistics examples to make the core experience better. I think it's also important that we try to make sure that we can make these things accessible without asking certain groups of people to make these huge compromises in how they use the applications and how they communicate. So I think it's both excellent, inspiring, but also kind of a cautionary tale. And I think it's something that we definitely should learn from and look to the ways that people are taking this and making it their own, and try to adapt those and make it better with them.
I see we're running short of time, but to kind of bring it back to the community and to what all of us can be thinking about. When I asked you what you wanted to make sure we covered in the session, you phrased it really well. You said the connections that will need to be made between the people that understand the need for accessibility, those that understand the how, and those who are actually in a position to implement these accessible interfaces and hardware. So for all of us here and elsewhere who want to see this moving forward, to convince those decision makers, money people, that this stuff should be prioritized, what's one piece of advice that we can walk away with from the session to help make that happen?
Yeah. I think the big one is that accessibility isn't just the ethical thing to do. It also makes really good business sense. 1 in 4 people in the US are disabled, which means that inaccessible applications are leaving behind a lot of kind of potential customers and money on the table. And what's more, a lot of buyers in government, in education, and healthcare, and industry are legally required to only purchase accessible software. I think you'll find for a lot of enterprise clients, accessibility is really part of those kind of minimum requirements. And so if you want, this is in addition, of course, to the fact that making apps accessible makes them better for everybody, whether they have permanent disabilities or not, because all of us are in places where we have kind of temporary or situational disabilities. And that curb cut effect is definitely real. I think one of the things we realize, of course, that accessibility often gets left behind. It's, oh, kind of, we'll get back to this later type thing, when really it needs to be part of the minimum viable product. And I think that's why for us at XR Access, one of the big things that we're going to be doing, one of our core pillars, is business cases for inclusive XR. We're going to be compiling, use cases, case studies, all kinds of things that will help kind of managers and executives and whatnot who maybe don't have either a design development background or an accessibility background, but they know kind of what needs to happen in terms of everything else to make an app launch. We're going to be making resources kind of by them and for them. And so if that's something you're interested in, you don't need to have a technical background in order to contribute to this discussion. So definitely come by, XR Access and help contribute to that conversation.
Thanks. Yeah, Mara or Stephen, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I feel like I'm not coming from the accessibility group per se. We're sister groups in the research org, and I work a lot, right? Like I work on Soundscape. I come more from neuroscience perception and also real-time systems in computer science. So I feel like the gaps that should be more multidisciplinary, right? I feel like that is an area that many more people can start contributing to the accessibility space. And I think, options like the XR access are becoming more important for people to know that how they can bridge this gap. And I feel like, you were saying here, we need more developers to be working on this. We need a combination, right? Like it's not the community that can build their own path forward. It has to be also on the trenches, people who are already working with the technology that start bridging gaps. And I think it seems more complex, but it also is more threadable, multi-threaded, right? Like it can go in parallel, it can grow, it has some potential there that in short time we can make a lot of impact if a lot of people get involved in this.
Yeah, great. Well, I want to say, looks like we got maybe like 1 minute, but I would love for us all to just take 1 minute before we close things down to just think about and maybe write down, you can feel free to put it in the chat, like one thing you could be doing that we all could be doing to advocate for greater accessibility in the workplace. And so feel free to just take that minute and then we'll wrap up. And in the meantime, I'll be posting links to the panelists' work and to the Hubs experience if folks want to check that out. And Dylan, Mara, Stephen, if there are other links you'd like to post, feel free.
You're welcome also to enter our Microsoft Research Accessibility group, which has also in the past done Scene VR, which has been very interesting hack into existing VR applications to, augment contrast or make things bigger or read aloud the content, right? But the interesting thing is that it hooks into existing games, right? So it's not just a demo. Yeah. I'll share that too.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here and for the work that I'm sure you no doubt do in your own communities around this issue. Whether you're an expert or you're new like I am to the space, I know it can be intimidating to dive into this work and put it out there for everyone to see. And the reality is that we're going to get things wrong and there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but the point isn't to get everything right. The point is for more of us to be moving this work forward and to normalize it. And to be designing these tools, as we mentioned before, from the start. So don't be afraid to reach out to me, to the panelists and their organizations, to the people in your own communities, and to continue to advocate for inclusive technology. I will be moving over to the main room of the Hubs experience that we posted a link for, and I've got about 20 minutes or so that I can take there to kind of introduce folks to to that experience, it's definitely a work in progress, but designed to just call out some of the considerations that are and advancements that are happening in VR accessibility. So check that out. Enjoy Mozfest. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Mike, for hosting us. Great panel.
You bet.
Thanks everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for a great session. Thank you.
It's the difference between this. Candace stares ahead. And this. Candace purses her lips and rolls her neck.